From freak accidents to still unsolved mysteries to deeply costly mistakes, these celebs did in death what they also achieved in life: make headlines.
For nearly as long as musicians have been rockin' and rollin', losing beloved rock stars has been an all too common part of the chaotic culture. However, some stars' deaths are weirder than others. Ozzy Osbourne was already famous when he hired Randy Rhoads as his new guitarist within seconds of meeting him. Rhoads, who had previously been one of the founding members of Quiet Riot, played on some of the most classic Ozzy albums, including Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, and most notably the song Crazy Train. While his accomplishments were enough to see Rhoads inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2021, sadly, he was only in Ozzy's band for a couple of years before he died. While on tour, the band's bus stopped for a rest at a lot that held some small planes. The tour bus driver, Andrew Aycock, was also a pilot and decided to take a couple of flights. Despite being afraid of flying, the 25-year-old Rhoads was a passenger on the final one, along with the band's 58-year-old seamstress, Rachel Youngblood. On his previous flights, Aycock had flown closely over the tour bus, trying to wake up the people sleeping inside it. Sadly, this time around, the prank went wrong and the plane's wing clipped the bus. The collision caused the plane to crash, killing all 3 of the people inside. However, according to Louder, there are other theories on the accident. Witnesses say Aycock might have been trying to crash deliberately, and Rhoads was attempting to stop him. Or that Youngblood had a heart attack and fell on the controls, causing the plane to nosedive. Unfortunately, the true reason will forever remain unknown.
If he hadn't have got killed when he did, he would be up there with the big guys.
Bobby Fuller had been playing music since he was a kid in Texas, and by 1966, he and his band, the Bobby Fuller 4, had a top 10 hit with I Fought the Law. They were famous and going places, although this was marred by annoyance at their manager and his many strange ideas for publicity stunts. Otherwise, according to Fuller's loved ones, he was happy. However, on July 18, 1966, Fuller was found dead in his car covered in gasoline at the age of 23. Witnesses say he had injuries like he'd been in a fight, and that his car hadn't been in the parking lot where it was found just minutes before, even though he had been dead for hours. If this wasn't weird enough, officials didn't seem to agree on why Fuller ended up dead. While several obituaries in major newspapers implied that he had died by suicide, the official report determined it was accidental. However, even that wasn't conclusive, as the report also had a question mark next to the boxes for both suicide and accident. The debate about whether Fuller's death was suicide, accident, or murder has raged for decades. Fuller's strange death was even included in the October 18, 1996 broadcast of Unsolved Mysteries, and although at least one person connected to him contacted the tip line afterward, the truth about his passing remains unknown. When Chicago was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2016, original member Terry Kath wasn't there, but was not forgotten, as co-founder Lee Loughnane told the Metro. Through the years, his guitar playing has been overlooked, probably because he was in such a large band. But if Terry had been in a trio, he probably would have been right up there with Jimi Hendrix, who idolized Terry. Kath seemed to be aware of this as well, since he was planning on releasing a solo album before he died on January 23, 1978. His friend and fellow musician Joe Walsh told Rolling Stone, with that band dynamic in Chicago, he needed to do a solo album. I don't know how much of it was recorded, but he was going in that direction, and it's a shame it didn't happen. He would have never remotely thought about suicide. That was a complete accident. Suicide or accident has always been the question surrounding Kath's bizarre death. The musician was deep into drugs and also loved guns, which is never a good combination. When he died, he was handling firearms which he assured the person he was with were unloaded.
He ejected all the bullets out of the gun. Then he let the clip go, left one in the chamber.
According to Louder, his last words were supposedly, "What do you think I'm going to do, blow my brains out?" Sadly, the gun went off. Kath was 31 years old. Dimebag Darrell Abbott was a founding member of Pantera, the incredibly popular metal band. They formed in 1981, but in the 21st century, the band split up, and Abbott started a new band called Damage Plan. In 2004, Damage Plan was playing a gig in Cincinnati, Ohio, when a man named Nathan Gale jumped on stage. He damaged thousands of dollars in equipment and fought with security before being removed. The police were called, but no charges were filed, because the band thought it would be too inconvenient to return for the court date. 8 months later, Gale showed up at another Damage Plan concert in Columbus. Some people present noticed him as soon as he entered the venue from a side entrance and raced towards the stage. As Billy Payne of Volume Dealer, another band on the bill that night, told Rolling Stone, The dude was way determined. He was on a mission. He looked angry. He was walking like he was going into battle. Gale got on stage, pulled out a gun, and confronted Abbott. Joe Dameron, Volume Dealer's bass player, said Gale looked to be saying something, but he couldn't hear what. Gale then shot Abbott, but at first it wasn't clear how serious the situation was. A security guard present said, "I thought they were playing a big gimmick. People were pumping their fists, thinking it was a hoax." When people finally started to intervene, Gale shot and killed 3 of them. Sadly, Abbott did not make it either. He was 38. A cellist trained at the Royal Academy of Music may not sound like your standard rock star, but Mike Edwards was an original member of the Electric Light Orchestra. He played with them from 1972 to 1975, a period that encompassed 4 albums and 2 top 10 hits on the UK charts. Edwards was a big hit with fans, standing out for his kooky outfits and the bits he did on tour, such as playing the cello with a piece of fruit and pretending to play his cello before it exploded. He eventually left the band but continued to play music, and his death fit right in with his strange stage persona. On September 3, 2010, the 62-year-old was killed in a freak accident when a 1,300-pound hay bale rolled off a tractor and into a road. It then slammed into Edwards' car, crushing it. At the time of his death, Edwards was playing with a local group called Devon Baroque, and fellow member Jasper Solomon told BBC News, "Mike's talent was his musicality. He could range over all genres from classical to jazz, modern to medieval Renaissance. He lived for his music, and it showed." The chairman of the music group, Angus Gordon, said, "He was simply the nicest guy and a brilliant musician. He taught the cello, and his incredible patience and encouragement, even with the slowest of students, made him a very good teacher." Everyone knows there's a long list of stars who died at age 27, but Les Harvey's inclusion on the list has to be one of the most surprising. He was in several bands in the UK before joining one called Power, which was renamed one night in 1969 by Led Zeppelin's manager. From then on, the iconic Scottish band was known as Stone the Crows, and their albums are still popular re-releases many decades later. On May 3, 1972, the group was preparing to perform at a gig in Wales. Some 1,200 people were in the audience, and according to contemporary reporting, some of them decided to take souvenirs in the form of wires out of the band's electronics before they took to the stage. This, of course, caused technical problems, which took time to fix. Harvey came on stage to explain the delay when disaster struck. As drummer Colin Allen explained to Louder, "We heard this deep humming sound. Leslie had the microphone in one hand and his guitar in the other. They kind of went together, and then like an arc shape appeared. I was up really quickly and kicked the guitar out of his hand as he was lying on the floor." The accident was caused because a ground wire to the microphone had not been fixed, and when Harvey touched his metal guitar strings, he closed the circuit. He died a short time later in the hospital, aged 27. Philip Taylor Kramer joined the band Iron Butterfly in 1974 and played bass on 2 of their albums. After he left the band, he went on to become a rocket scientist and then an important figure in the booming computer industry of the early 1990s. But on February 12, 1995, he vanished. Kramer went to pick up a business associate and their partner from the airport, but left before meeting them. Chuck Carter, a private investigator hired by Kramer's family, told the LA Times, "Something happened during that time, either in his head or at the terminal, that made him turn away. And I'll tell you, I haven't a clue. The guy didn't have an enemy. The guy was a dedicated family man."
There's no indication that there's another woman involved. There's no indication of alcohol or drugs or anything of that nature.
What we do know is that Kramer started calling loved ones to say goodbye. Then he called 911 and announced he was going to kill himself and said, "I want everyone to know O.J. Simpson is innocent. They did it." According to the debrief, Kramer was expected to contribute expert testimony at Simpson's trial. However, in 1999, Kramer's van and remains were discovered at the bottom of a canyon. It can't be proven if he died by suicide, and theories of foul play still abound. Some think he might have been threatened over one of his new software programs, but we'll likely never know for sure. The year before he died, Colonel Bruce Hampton told Arts ATL, "I never plan anything, good, bad, or ugly. I just go with it. I must say that I've always just wanted to play music. Not work music, not earn music, just play music and make joyful noise. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but I keep doing it. Show up and play." According to CNN, Hampton was known as the granddaddy of the jam scene, and the respect other musicians had for him was clear by how many showed up to jam with him at his 70th birthday concert in 2017. It was the very end of the performance when Hampton dropped to his knees, then laid on the stage. The audience just thought he was playing around, as did the other musicians, who kept playing as Hampton lay there, suffering a massive heart attack. It took several minutes for anyone to realize something was very wrong. However, according to his friends, it's exactly what Hampton would have wanted. Rolling Stones keyboardist Chuck Leavell, who was on stage with Hampton at the time, said, "A poetic exit." And I'm sure if he had written the script himself, that would have been the last page of the last chapter. Additionally, Hampton's former bandmate Jeff Moger posted on Facebook that he, quote, "could have never imagined a more joyful departure." In the US, the day the music died was the plane crash that killed Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper. But in Ireland and Northern Ireland, that phrase refers to July 31st, 1975, when 3 members of the popular group the Miami Showband were murdered. Show bands were huge on the island at the time. They would travel around playing concerts and regularly cross the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom. Unfortunately, the Miami Showband did this in the 1970s, right in the middle of the sectarian violence known as the Troubles.
The showband scene was fantastic because people were living in the Troubles and it was a release for them.
When the band's van was pulled over, they thought it was a checkpoint, a common occurrence at the time. What they didn't know was it was a fake army patrol made up of Ulster Defense Regiment and Ulster Volunteer Force members. What took the event from purely tragic to bizarre is that the Ulster men didn't plan on killing the band, but instead to place a bomb on their bus that would explode once they were across the border in Ireland. However, it exploded while it was being attached, killing 2 of the Ulster men. The remaining assailants then started shooting at the band, killing lead singer Fran O'Toole, guitarist Tony Garrity, and trumpeter Brian McCoy. 2 other members were injured but survived the massacre. The incident effectively put an end to Irish show bands crossing the border to play in Northern Ireland.
Bizarre helicopter accidents, prop guns gone wrong, and unsolved boating disasters. All these things have ended the lives of beloved actors. Here are their strange stories. Anne Heche was perhaps best known for starring opposite Harrison Ford in the 1998 drama 6 Days, 7 Nights, and for her long-term relationship with Ellen DeGeneres. Throughout her career, Heche had been open about her belief that she had serious undiagnosed mental health issues stemming from a difficult childhood, and also about her past heavy drug use. Despite these issues, she amassed an enviable body of work as an actor. Unfortunately, her life came to an end in bizarre fashion on the morning of August 5, 2022. Heche was driving her Mini Cooper in a Los Angeles suburb when she inexplicably lost control of the vehicle and crashed into a private residence. The ensuing blaze was so intense that it took 20 minutes for firefighters to beat the flames back enough to move the car. Miraculously, Heche initially survived, hanging on for nearly a week before succumbing to her injuries on August 11th. Investigators suspected at first that the crash was due to drugs or alcohol, but this was not the case. In December, the LA Coroner's Office announced that there was no evidence pointing to Heche being impaired in any way at the time of the accident. Brandon Lee, had he lived, may have eclipsed even his famous father Bruce Lee in star power. Like his dad, Brandon Lee was an explosively talented martial artist, possessed with a ton of charisma and a formidable screen presence. His early features, such as 1991's Showdown in Little Tokyo and 1992's Rapid Fire, were proof positive of these qualities. But it was his breakthrough lead role in the 1994 supernatural thriller The Crow, an adaptation of the 1989 indie comic of the same name, that made him a household name. It was also his final role, as his life was cut short due to a freak accident with just 2 weeks of filming left. Lee was killed when he was shot in the abdomen by a prop gun fired by actor Michael Massey, a gun which had been improperly handled and which contained a portion of a dummy round in one of its chambers. Lee was only 28 years old, and although Massey was found to have not been at fault, he never truly recovered after Brandon Lee's death.
What happened to Brandon was a tragic accident. It's something that I'm gonna live with.
The Crow went on to become a box office success and a cult classic, but one can't help but wonder what might have been if the circumstances that led to its star's death had played out differently. With his steely good looks and intimidating presence, David Carradine carved out a decades-long career in film and television. He was a mainstay in westerns before famously starring in the TV series Kung Fu, and while many of his 80s and 90s credits consisted of TV guest spots in B-movies, he experienced a serious career resurgence in the early 2000s. Carradine played the title role in Quentin Tarantino's feature epic Kill Bill, and appeared in guest roles in hit TV shows like Medium and Alias. In 2009, his life was cut short. He was found dead in the closet of a hotel room in Bangkok, Thailand. While authorities first suspected death by suicide, This turned out not to be accurate. It's since been alleged that Carradine was instead partaking in the dangerous practice known as autoerotic asphyxiation. The finding was bolstered by court documents filed in his divorce from his ex-wife Marina Anderson, in which she alluded to Carradine's history of, quote, deviant sexual behavior. Several projects featuring Carradine were released posthumously, including the thriller The American Connection, which began production in 2007 but didn't see release until 2021. Hollywood legend Vic Morrow was perhaps best known as the star of the 60s TV series Combat. He had settled into a career of supporting roles when he was tapped to lend his considerable skill to Twilight Zone the movie, a feature film revival of the iconic TV series. In the lead-off segment, Time Out, Morrow portrayed Bill Connors, an unrepentant racist who finds himself supernaturally thrust into the shoes of people he's persecuted in the past. In one scene, he was to play a Vietnamese peasant during the Vietnam War, frantically attempting to rescue 2 children as a U.S. Army helicopter fires on them. The scene was cut after its filming went tragically wrong. Pyrotechnics used in the scene caused damage to the helicopter, causing veteran pilot Dorsey Wingo to lose control of the craft, which crashed directly on top of Morrow and 2 child actors, killing all 3. In a first for Hollywood, the segment's director John Landis, producer George Folsey Jr., Wingo, and 2 others were tried criminally for their actions on set. After a sensational 10-month-long trial, all parties involved were acquitted.
Well, it's just a wonderful time, and I wish we could get the jurors close for a minute. I want to kiss at least half of them.
Natalie Wood was an actor who bridged the gap between old and new Hollywood. As a child, she appeared in the 1947 edition of Miracle on 34th Street. As a teenager, she co-starred with James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, and she portrayed Maria in the classic 1961 musical West Side Story. By the late 60s and 70s, she had successfully transitioned to adult fare like the comedy Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, and in the early 80s, she was tapped to star in the sci-fi thriller Brainstorm. This would be her final role, due to a fateful yacht trip with her husband Robert Wagner and her co-star Christopher Walken. By all accounts, Wood and Wagner got into a drunken argument aboard the boat during the night of November 28, 1981. Wood somehow ended up overboard, and her body was found the next morning a mile from the yacht. Authorities ruled the death accidental, but the investigation was reopened in 2011. 7 years later, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officially named Wagner as a person of interest in her death. Although he's always denied any wrongdoing, there are those who believe Wagner killed Natalie Wood.
They reopened the Natalie Wood thing. Do you have a comment on that?
No, I never did.
In 2020, Wood's biographer Suzanne Finstad claimed to have unearthed new witnesses who had information that would prove that Wood's death was no accident. But as of mid-2024, the case is still unresolved. Gian-Carlo Coppola, the son of Hollywood icon Francis Ford Coppola, was just beginning to make his presence known in Hollywood. As a boy, he appeared in bit parts in his father's classics like The Godfather and Apocalypse Now, and as a young man, he popped up in a larger role in 1983's Rumblefish. He also worked as a producer on the classic 1983 coming-of-age film The Outsiders, and was working as a camera operator on Gardens of Stone in 1986, when a tragic boating mishap took place during a break from shooting. Coppola and Griffin O'Neill, the son of actor Ryan O'Neill, had been drinking and were riding in a boat that attempted to cut between 2 others. They failed to realize that the rear boat was actually being towed by the lead one. Both young men came into contact with the tow line. O'Neill survived the accident, but 22-year-old Coppola was driven into the floor of the craft and suffered fatal head injuries.
But you can't make good memories on the water unless you know how to boat safely.
If I'd taken a course, I'd have some better memories.
In a 2020 interview with Vulture, Francis Ford Coppola cited Gardens of Stone as the one film he wishes he had never made, saying, "It cost me everything, and that was one of the movies I made at a time when I had to make a movie every year to just keep my house and my household together. I fantasize about having not made Gardens of Stone. I wouldn't have lost my son."
Hi, I'm Jane Dornacker, traffic reporter for WNBC.
Jane Dornacker was a woman of many talents. She began her career in show business as a comedian, then briefly performed with a band called Layla and the Snakes before joining legendary Bay Area rockers The Tubes in the late 70s. In 1983, she launched her acting career, appearing in a small role in The Right Stuff, and was also known for her stints as a radio traffic reporter for KFRC San Francisco, and later for WNBC New York City. In April 1986, a helicopter she was riding in crashed into the Hackensack River, but she and her pilot managed to swim to safety. She was not as lucky in a second crash just months later. Dornacker was in the middle of her traffic report when, according to witnesses, the aircraft simply stalled out and plummeted into the Hudson River. Emergency responders were on the scene within minutes, but Dornacker was unresponsive when pulled from the water, and she was later pronounced dead at a local hospital. One of the great actors of Hollywood's golden age, William Holden appeared in many classics over several decades, from Billy Wilder's 1950 opus Sunset Boulevard to Sidney Lumet's 1976 masterpiece Network. He was the quintessential old-school actor, and like many of his peers, he was a bit of a drinker. This, unfortunately, was a factor in the accident that led to his death in 1981. Holden was drinking alone in his Hollywood apartment when he apparently slipped on a throw rug, smacking his head on a bedside table. Still conscious, Holden tried to tend to the 2-inch gash on his forehead with a few tissues, to no avail. He passed out, and he soon bled to death. The coroner who attended to Holden would later say that he registered a blood alcohol level of 0.22 and was likely unaware of just how badly he had hurt himself. He further noted that although Holden probably lived for about half an hour after sustaining the injury, it appeared that he had not tried to call for help. Jon-Erik Hexum was practically made for the lead role in a series that could only have been created in the 80s, Cover Up, in which he portrayed a former Green Beret turned model who, accompanied by a fashion photographer played by Jennifer O'Neill, conducted covert intelligence operations around the globe. The series lasted only one season, but Hexum only appeared in 7 episodes. He was fatally injured on set after a tragic accident between scenes. The cast was filming in October 1984 when they learned there would be a delay in shooting the next scene. According to witnesses, Hexum asked his castmates, "Can you believe this crap?" before picking up a prop pistol, holding it to his head, and pulling the trigger. The blast fractured his skull and propelled a bone fragment into his brain, and despite the best efforts of doctors to save him, he was declared brain dead 6 days later. Perhaps the only silver lining, Hexum was an organ donor. His heart saved the life of a former Navy SEAL and father of 2, his kidneys saved 2 more lives, and his corneas gave sight to 2 more people. Jack Nance enjoyed a 3-decade career in film and television, but he'll forever be associated with the role of Henry Spencer, the protagonist of David Lynch's surrealist 1977 masterpiece Eraserhead. The actor landed steady work throughout the 80s and 90s and continued to work with Lynch in projects such as the iconic TV series Twin Peaks, as well as Lynch's big screen features. In 1997, a trip down the street from his home in Pasadena to a local donut shop cost Nance his life. Witnesses told authorities that Nance got into a verbal altercation with 2 men outside the shop, which turned physical. Nance was punched in the head, but walked away from the scene, returning to his apartment. He was found dead the following morning at his home by a friend who came by to check on him. The cause of death was ruled to be blunt force trauma to the head. No one was charged with the crime.
The fact that Jack's death was an unsolved homicide in some kind of quirky way, I think he would have loved that.
Speaking with the press, Nance's old friend Lynch did not seem terribly surprised, telling reporters, "Jack always said he wouldn't be too hard to kill."
A rising star cut down by a faulty gear shift, a possible victim of the poltergeist curse, and a plane crash that launched the CIA conspiracy theory. These child stars may have had varying degrees of success in their careers, but all of their tragic passings occurred in strange ways. Anton Yelchin got his start in acting at an early age, booking his first TV role in a 2000 episode of ER, before delivering a memorable performance in the film Hearts in Atlantis. Yelchin successfully navigated the often tricky transition to adult roles, most notably portraying Pavel Chekhov in the Star Trek film franchise.
I can do that! I can do that!
Yelchin's star was on the rise when he was killed in a freak accident involving his vehicle in 2016. TMZ was the first to report that his body was discovered pinned between a mailbox and the security gate in front of his home by his SUV, which had rolled down an incline while in neutral. Yelchin's parents filed a lawsuit against the vehicle's manufacturer, Fiat Chrysler, claiming that the vehicle's gear shifters were responsible for the fatal accident. Indeed, just a couple of months earlier, the company had recalled more than 1 million vehicles due to confusing gear shifters that led drivers to think their vehicles were in park when they were actually in neutral, resulting in numerous accidents. That was precisely what had happened to Yelchin when he exited the vehicle to punch in the security code. One of the biggest child stars of the 1980s, Gary Coleman played wisecracking Arnold Jackson on hit sitcom Different Strokes.
What you talking about, Willis?
Coleman had suffered health problems from an early age due to nephritis, a congenital defect of the kidney. As a result, he required dialysis throughout his life and had undergone 2 kidney transplant operations, one at the age of 5 and another when he was a teenager. Given his chronic medical issues, Coleman's life expectancy was shortened, and in his later years he experienced some well-publicized health scares, including a seizure in February 2010 while on the set of The Insider. Just a few months later, the 42-year-old actor suffered a serious fall at his home just outside of Provo, Utah. Coleman was rushed to a nearby hospital where doctors determined that he'd suffered an intracranial hemorrhage. Coleman was conscious when he first arrived at the hospital but eventually slipped into a coma. He was placed on life support, which was discontinued soon after. In a statement, a spokesperson revealed that friends and family were at his side when the life support was terminated. Just 6 years old when Poltergeist was released in 1982, Heather O'Rourke catapulted to stardom as Carol Ann, the film's central character. She went on to reprise the role in 2 Poltergeist sequels and appeared in several TV series. Months after completing Poltergeist 3, O'Rourke, then 12, died on an operating table in a San Diego hospital while undergoing surgery to address a bowel obstruction. The obstruction led to an infection that caused septic shock, which then resulted in pulmonary and cardiac arrest. What made O'Rourke's death so bizarre was that she hadn't demonstrated any symptoms, even though she had the undiagnosed condition since birth. O'Rourke's tragic death came to become the cornerstone of the so-called Poltergeist curse, which included the grisly murder of her on-screen sister, actor Dominique Dunne, and the eventual deaths of cast members Julian Beck and Will Sampson. Matthew Garber has delighted generations of children via his role as youngster Michael Banks in Disney's 1964 musical Mary Poppins. Garber made just 3 movies during his brief Hollywood career, all Disney productions. In addition to Mary Poppins, he also appeared in 1963's The 3 Lives of Thomasina and The Gnome Mobile in 1967. After that, he gave up acting and returned to normal life in London. A few years after his graduation, Garber was visiting India when he became infected with hepatitis. In the summer of 1977, he decided to return to London for further medical treatment. Sadly, he'd waited too long. When he finally made it back to England, medical tests revealed that the hepatitis had spread to his pancreas. He died at the age of 21. The official cause of death was determined to be hemorrhagic necrotizing pancreatitis, a rare but serious condition that had been left untreated for a tragically long period of time. A popular child actor in her native Britain, Mya-Lecia Naylor experienced early success as star of the kids' show Tatty's Hotel, before going on to appear in films such as Cloud Atlas and Code Red. From 2014 until 2018, she was a cast member on the popular British series Millie in Between. She was just 16 years old when she died under tragic circumstances. A subsequent inquest determined that she died by hanging and categorized her death to have been caused by, quote, misadventure rather than death by suicide. E! News obtained the coroner's report in which the assistant coroner came to conclude that Naylor's death had been accidental. Her father, Martin Naylor, concurred when he testified at the inquest, stating, "She had not been her normal self. She was stressed about her exams. I honestly believe she was just making some sort of point. I genuinely believe she did not mean to do it." J. Madison Wright was just 9 years old when she made her on-screen debut in a 1994 episode of Grace Under Fire, before guest starring in the Fran Drescher sitcom The Nanny. Later that year, she was cast in the NBC sci-fi series Earth 2, which ran for just 1 season. She continued acting for a few more years, making her final appearance in the 1998 comedy Safety Patrol. Wright was forced to put her acting career on pause after an X-ray revealed her heart was dangerously enlarged. She was diagnosed with restrictive cardiomyopathy, a condition in which the muscles in the heart's lower chamber become rigid and won't fill with blood. In 2000, 15-year-old Wright underwent a life-saving heart transplant and subsequently became a vocal advocate for organ donation. In 2006, she married Brent Joseph Morris. One day after the newlyweds returned from their honeymoon to their home in Lexington, Kentucky, Wright had a fatal heart attack. She was just 21 years old at the time of her death. Best known as a member of the boy band Together, actor and singer Michael Cuccione made his screen debut in 1997, appearing in an episode of Baywatch. Prior to that, he'd had a difficult childhood, as he was just 9 years old when he was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. Cuccione underwent an aggressive course of chemotherapy that lasted for 6 months and was eventually declared free of cancer. Unfortunately, a routine checkup 6 months later revealed that the cancer had returned and Cuccione required a bone marrow transplant. That medical procedure was successful.
He always had a positive attitude, even at times when he was struggling, and he did have
fear of what was going to happen next.
However, intensive chemo had left his organs in a perpetually weakened state, particularly his lungs. In late 2000, Cuccione and his mother were involved in a car accident, and he underwent surgery to repair a damaged diaphragm. While hospitalized, he became ill with pneumonia. His lungs had become so weakened by the chemotherapy from years earlier that 2 weeks later, he was still unable to breathe on his own without a respirator. In January 2001, he died at age 16. In 1982, 10-year-old Samantha Smith had been watching TV shows about the Cold War, horrified by the idea of nuclear war. She wrote a letter to Soviet leader Yuri Andropov, asking what plans he had to avoid it from happening. The letter made her a sensation in Russia, and in 1983, she and her parents were invited to visit Moscow. Her popularity also exploded in her homeland. In 1984, she hosted her own TV special, Samantha Smith Goes to Washington, Campaign 84, interviewing various American politicians. She then went on to dabble in acting, guest starring on Charles in Charge, and playing a recurring role in the TV series Lime Street. In August 1985, Smith and her father were returning to their home in Maine after she'd been shooting Lime Street. They were flying in a small commuter plane when the aircraft crashed while attempting to land, killing them both. Oddly enough, Smith's death sparked a conspiracy theory in the Soviet Union, which claimed that she'd been assassinated by the CIA because her childish efforts to avoid nuclear war didn't align with America's aggressively anti-Soviet policy at the time. The R-Gang shorts from the 1920s and 30s, later renamed The Little Rascals, featured many memorable characters. Among the most beloved characters was Alfalfa, played by child actor Carl Switzer. As Switzer grew older, acting roles dwindled and he found himself typecast. Relegated to low-budget B-movies and bit parts, he made ends meet by tending bar and hiring himself out as a hunting guide. He also bred dogs as a sideline, and in 1959, Switzer sold a dog to a fellow named Moses Stilts and believed that he still owed him $50. Switzer had been drinking when he showed up on Stilts' doorstep, demanding that the debt be repaid immediately. According to Stilts, Switzer burst into his home and a scuffle ensued, during which Switzer pulled a knife. Stilts, however, one-upped the former child star when he pulled out a gun and ended the altercation by shooting Switzer dead. Stilts was put on trial, and his claims that he acted in self-defense were upheld by the coroner's report. The jury agreed that he had been defending himself and deemed Switzer's death to be a justifiable homicide. Best known as Darla in The Little Rascals during the 1930s and 40s, Darla Hood shone in the role. Hood continued her acting career into the 1950s as a series regular on The Ken Murray Show. She went on to experience success as a singer, and she also did voiceover work for TV commercials, singing jingles for Campbell's Soup and Chicken of the Sea Tuna. Hood was just 48 years old when she died in 1979 after undergoing a routine operation to remove her appendix. An autopsy subsequently revealed that she'd received a transfusion of tainted blood during surgery and had inadvertently been infected with hepatitis, which led to heart failure. Just 5 years old when she was discovered, Judith Barsi had a successful run as a child actor. Barsi was cast in dozens of commercials before going on to appear in numerous TV series and films, including Jaws: The Revenge, and providing the voice of young dinosaur Ducky in the animated hit The Land Before Time. Sadly, the young actor's life was cut short in 1988 when 10-year-old Barsi was found dead in her home alongside her mother and father, Maria and Joseph Barsi. Joseph had killed his wife and daughter, shooting them both with a .32 caliber pistol. After setting the bodies on fire, he fatally shot himself. Subsequent reports pointed out that there were plenty of warning signs indicating Barsi was being continually abused by her father. A posthumous Los Angeles Times expose quoted a relative who claimed that when Barsi left for Barbados to film the Jaws sequel, her father threatened to slash her throat if she didn't return. As her parents' marriage deteriorated, Barsi became so stressed by her father's threats of violence that she plucked out all her eyelashes.
I wish that Daddy'd stop shouting at Mommy.
She told family and friends how terrifying her home life had become, allegedly saying, "I'm afraid to go home. My daddy is drunk every day and I know he wants to kill my mother." A medical mishap, an onstage seizure, and a deadly attack with an axe. These rappers gained fame with their music, but became infamous on account of their tragic deaths. Presenting a gritty, visceral, and bleak depiction of urban New York life in the early 1990s, Mobb Deep helped define the East Coast gangsta rap sound of the era. The duo, consisting of Havoc and Prodigy, released 8 albums worth of material, including acknowledged hits and classics like Shook Ones Part 2 and Quiet Storm. Mobb Deep's Prodigy, born Albert Johnson, contended with chronic medical issues from infancy. As a baby, he was diagnosed with sickle cell anemia, wherein red blood cells change form and don't last as long as they should, leading to extremely painful blood flow problems as well as weakness and diminished motor skills. In June 2017, Prodigy performed at an outdoor hip-hop festival in Las Vegas, and the extreme heat triggered an episode that required hospitalization. That's common for sickle cell anemia patients, but while under medical supervision for that health issue, Prodigy choked to death. He was eating an egg, and part of it became lodged in his airway, killing the rapper. Prodigy was 42 years old. A producer, singer, and writer, as well as a rapper, Static Major was instrumental in the creation of some of the biggest and most era-defining hip-hop flavored hits of the late 1990s and early 2000s. He wrote Aaliyah's Are You That Somebody and Try Again, helped produce Genuine's Pony, and earned a featured artist credit on Lil Wayne's Lollipop, a Grammy-winning #1 hit in 2008. In February 2008, the musician-born Stephen Garrett sought medical treatment at Baptist Hospital East in Louisville, Kentucky, the city where he grew up. Doctors explained that his suite of symptoms was caused by myasthenia gravis, a scarcely diagnosed autoimmune disease. It's a chronic condition that usually appears in men over the age of 50. Static Major was only 33, and he wouldn't survive his hospital visit. During immediate treatments, a surgeon placed a catheter into the rapper's neck, and he immediately reported severe pain, not at the point of insertion, but in what felt like his internal organs. An X-ray indicated an improperly placed line, and when the nurse removed the catheter, Garrett lost consciousness. Doctors were unable to save him. The dark, introspective, and highly descriptive rap subgenre known as drill emerged in the 2010s, and Pop Smoke became one of the movement's earliest and best-known figures. In 2019 and 2020, Pop Smoke released Meet the Woo and Meet the Woo 2, the latter peaking at number 7 on the US album chart. In the summer of 2020, the rapper scored 4 top 20 hits, For the Night, What You Know About Love, The Woo, and Mood Swings, but he wouldn't get to enjoy any of that success. In February 2020, the Brooklyn-based Pop Smoke, also known as Bashar Jackson, lived temporarily in the Hollywood Hills area of Los Angeles, in a home owned by Real Housewives of Beverly Hills cast member Teddy Mellencamp. In the early hours of February 19, 2020, a group of 4 young men staged a home invasion with the intent to rob the house and the rapper. During the altercation, one of the masked intruders shot Jackson. Suffering mortal wounds in the attack, the rapper was taken to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where his death was declared. Pop Smoke was 20 years old. While the rapper's death was undoubtedly tragic, the bizarre aspect was the part that social media had enabled the home invaders to locate Pop Smoke.
We showed police social media posts that appear to show Pop Smoke and a friend posing in front of the home yesterday.
Hours before the crime took place, the rapper had posted photos of elaborate, expensive gifts he had been sent and congratulations for the recent release of his mixtape, Meet the Woo 2, with a label bearing his Los Angeles address. Performer Joe C. joined the Twisted Brown Trucker Band in the 1990s after being spotted in the crowd by Kid Rock. Appreciated for his deep knowledge of the star's early indie work, Joe C. rapped and served as a hype man, helping to popularize his boss and friend's then novel combination of hip-hop, hard rock, and country. Early in childhood, Joe C. was diagnosed with celiac disease. Aside from its gastrointestinal effects in relation to the consumption of gluten, celiac disease is also a serious autoimmune condition that can lead to joint pain, mental health issues, and growth and maturation problems. For the rapper-born Joe Calleja, celiac disease is the reason why his adult height was limited to 3 feet 9 inches. He also endured intestinal pain, and in attempts to stay healthy, he ingested 65 pills and underwent kidney dialysis treatment, both daily. On November 16, 2000, Joe C., who had to cut down on his touring jaunts with Twisted Brown Trucker for health reasons, died in his sleep from complications of chronic celiac disease at the age of 26. James Jimi Patterson built a reputation locally as a musician, and more specifically as a rapper on Long Island, New York. In 2022, Patterson left New York in favor of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and was gearing up to put out his first album. Early in the evening of October 17th, the rapper was sitting on a friend's sofa in the living room of their apartment eating an egg roll. On the other side of the room stood Israel Trejo, in the middle of negotiating the purchase of an axe from another person in the residence. At no point did Trejo and Patterson ever speak, and they reportedly hadn't met before that night. That makes it all the more inexplicable that Trejo decided to swing the axe in Patterson's direction without any warning or obvious cause. The axe landed squarely in the rapper's head.
The unprovoked attack, really the demonic aspect of this entire case, is difficult to get out of your head.
After 3 days in a Tulsa hospital, Patterson died from injuries to his head and brain. He was 22 years old. Police charged Trejo with first-degree murder, for which he received a sentence of life in prison. Atlanta's YSL Records is the home of many emergent trap rappers, including label founder Young Thug as well as Gunna and would-be superstar Lil Keed. In 2018, Lil Keed released 5 mixtapes, including Keed Talk to Him and Trapped on Cleveland 2, and he followed up regional success and accolades with some national long-form hits, Long Live Mexico and Trapped on Cleveland 3. Lil Keed's career was still on the rise when it all came to an abrupt and tragic end. In May 2022, Lil Keed experienced stomach and back pain so extreme that he couldn't leave his bed for 4 days. After his brother noticed Lil Keed's eyes had taken on a jaundiced yellow hue, a potential sign of liver problems, he took the rapper to a Los Angeles hospital. En route, the rapper had a seizure and lost consciousness. About 2 hours after arrival, Lil Keed was declared dead. He was 24 years old. An investigation conducted by the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner coroner determined that the rapper's death stemmed from an undiagnosed and untreated case of eosinophilia. In that rarely diagnosed condition, the body dangerously overproduces eosinophils, a variety of defensive white blood cells, possibly in response to a threat of parasite, cancer, or an allergen. Ambitious and eager to see if he had what it took to be a rapper, the musician who called himself Indian Red Boy loitered at Los Angeles area recording facilities and waited for his chance. As his aunt Jasmine Rivera told University Times, he just went into the studio hoping someone would hear him out, and one day they did and let him record. The ascendant rapper ultimately recorded very little music before his untimely death. On the afternoon of July 8, 2021, Indian Red Boy sat in a parked car outside of an apartment complex in Hawthorne, California, near Los Angeles, to make an Instagram live video. As he spoke with his friend and influencer Capone, who was at another location, an unidentified man approached the car and opened fire. At least 12 gunshots could be heard in the live feed, broadcast out to the rapper's tens of thousands of followers. Hawthorne police arrived at the scene and found the rapper deceased in the driver's seat of his car, having sustained a number of gunshot wounds. The rapper, born Zarel Dijon Rivera, was 21 years old and the victim of what police believed to be a premeditated act. Born Constantino Soblanogla and adopting the name Costa Titch, this rapper was among the biggest rising stars in African hip-hop, utilizing lyrics in English and South African languages as well as cutting-edge American beats. Albums Made in Africa and You're Welcome proved to be big hits in the 2020s, and Akon recruited the rapper to his Convict Culture label and performed on and amplified the remix of the hit Big Flexa. Costa Titch was seemingly primed for big success outside of his home country. Costa Titch was a major draw to the 2023 Ultra Music Festival, staged in Johannesburg, South Africa. As he performed his set on March 11th, the rapper suddenly fell down on stage and was assisted back to his feet by one of his dancers. The performance continued on for a few more moments, only for the rapper to once again stumble, this time tumbling off the stage. Despite receiving emergency medical treatment, Costa Titch died shortly thereafter. He was 28 years old. More than a year later, the musician's family shared the results of an autopsy, which determined that a combination of long-term stress and pressure on his heart triggered an irregular heartbeat, which then led to a fatal seizure. A rapper and singer associated with the Afrobeats movement, Mohbad, born Illyrio Lua Olandemiji Oloba, developed a significant following in his home nation of Nigeria.
He represented a voice that is not normally heard in Nigeria, and that's for the inner city youth.
After he performed a September 2023 show in Ikorodu, Mohbad engaged in a violent altercation with a lifelong friend and fellow hip-hop musician known as Prime Boy. Mohbad reared up to punch Prime Boy but didn't make contact and instead hit a car window, severely lacerating his hand. Over the next couple of days, the untreated injury grew inflamed and became extremely painful, leading the rapper to seek out medical attention, and he went to a nurse's assistant who practiced out of her home. She delivered multiple medicines intravenously, including what was supposed to be a tetanus shot to prevent potential bacterial infection. Immediately after, Mohbad suffered seizures and died in the early morning hours of September 12, 2023. The musician was 27 years old. The National Association of Nigerian Nurses and Midwives reported that the nurse who delivered the medicine wasn't a licensed medical professional, and she was subsequently arrested.